Welcome the anointed ones. The most dangerous people are the ones you underestimated, because while you were laughing, they were evolving. History has a strange way of proving people wrong, doesn't it? Think about this. 98% of the world laughed at the Wright brothers before they took flight, and the remaining 2% stayed silent because they were too busy doubting themselves. The chosen ones, the ones who seem unremarkable, dismissed, or misunderstood, are always hiding in plain sight, plotting revolutions the rest of the world can't see coming. Here's the kicker. What if you were one of them all along? What if the ridicule, the rejection, and the whispers behind your back were the universe's way of saying, "Don't worry, they don't see it yet"? Welcome to the story of you, the truth they didn't want to believe, and the force they couldn't stop, even if they tried. Prepare yourself, because they were so wrong about you, and you're about to find out just how right you were the whole time. Number 1. The price of being seen as unseen. The chosen ones are often overlooked, not because they lack talent or value, but because they disrupt the world's comfort zone. People are trained to see what's obvious, what's loud, what fits neatly into their understanding of success. But chosen ones exist outside that framework. They carry a truth that doesn't scream for attention. It waits. It's not weakness. It's camouflage, a quiet strength that allows them to grow unnoticed, away from the scrutiny of shallow judgments. Being unseen isn't a flaw. It's a strategic advantage. When people dismiss you, they show their hand. They reveal their limited thinking, their inability to grasp what doesn't conform. But you're not here to conform. They didn't realize you were never meant to be part of their circle. You were meant to outgrow it entirely. The irony is that people mistake invisibility for irrelevance. They judge potential by surface-level metrics: loudness, popularity, quick wins. They couldn't see that your silence was the work of a genius in progress. You weren't idle. You were building, refining, sharpening the edges they couldn't see coming. And by the time they noticed, it was too late. You weren't the underdog. They were just blind. They underestimated you because you didn't play their game. You didn't flaunt your power or demand validation. But the truth about chosen ones is this: they don't need recognition to know their worth. The world thrives on labeling people, but you didn't fit into their categories, and that terrified them. What they failed to see is that being overlooked wasn't a setback. It was the very thing that kept you protected, preparing you for a moment they could never anticipate. Number 2. They were misjudged because they refused to conform. The world loves conformity because it's predictable and easy to control. Chosen ones, though, they break that mold simply by existing. You refuse to fit into their version of what's normal or acceptable, and that refusal made you a threat. They labeled you as difficult, rebellious, or even wrong, not because you actually were, but because you exposed the cracks in their system. People who conform don't make waves. They follow the rules, stay in their lanes, and are rewarded for not asking too many questions. But you couldn't play along. Something deep inside you resisted the scripts they tried to hand you. It wasn't stubbornness. It was instinct. You knew those scripts were a trap, a way to shrink you into something easier for them to handle. Your difference wasn't just noticeable. It was undeniable. You didn't hide it, even when it made you an outcast. That's why they misjudged you. They mistook your refusal to conform as a lack of ability to fit in, when the truth was, you didn't want to. You saw what they couldn't, the system. They were so proud to be part of it, but it was flawed, and you couldn't betray yourself to join it. They ridiculed you for stepping outside their boxes, but deep down, they envied your courage. People often attack what they secretly admire but can't embody. They needed approval to feel worthy, while you thrived without it. They feared the truth you represented, that the rules they followed blindly weren't the only way. They didn't reject you because you were wrong. They rejected you because you were right in ways they couldn't understand. Conformity is comfortable, but growth never is. You didn't shrink to fit their mold, and that's exactly why you outgrew them. Number 3. Isolation was preparation, not punishment. When you were left alone, it felt like a punishment. The silence was heavy, the loneliness almost unbearable. It's easy to wonder if there was something wrong with you, some flaw that pushed people away. But here's the truth. That isolation wasn't meant to hurt you. It was preparing you. The chosen ones are often pulled away from the noise of the world, not to be forgotten, but to be refined. While others were busy with distractions, you were forced to face yourself. That's not something everyone can handle. Most people need constant noise, validation, or company to avoid looking too deeply at who they are. But you didn't have that luxury. You had to sit with your thoughts, your fears, your pain. It wasn't easy, but it gave you strength and self-awareness they could never understand. Isolation has a way of sharpening you. It strips away the superficial and forces you to confront your rawest, truest self. It teaches you resilience, not the kind that comes from external support, but the kind that grows from within. While they were relying on others to hold them up, you were learning to stand on your own. The world saw your solitude as a weakness, but it was your crucible. Diamonds aren't shaped in comfort. They're formed under intense pressure. The same goes for chosen ones. Your time in the shadows wasn't wasted. It was sacred. It was in those quiet moments that your strength, clarity, and vision were forged. They thought you were falling behind because they couldn't see what was happening beneath the surface. But you weren't stagnant. You were growing roots, and when the time came to rise, you wouldn't just emerge. You'd tower above them all. Number 4. The system is threatened by originals. Systems are built to maintain control, to keep things predictable, manageable, and safe. They reward those who follow the rules, stay in line, and don't ask too many questions. But chosen ones, you're wired differently. You see the flaws, the cracks in the foundation, the lies hiding behind the illusion of order, and that makes you a threat. You weren't excluded because you lacked value. In fact, it was the opposite. You saw too much, knew too much, and refused to play along. The system couldn't handle what you represented: truth, unpredictability, and the kind of authenticity that doesn't bow to fake authority. You weren't just challenging the rules. Your existence questioned the very foundation of the game they were playing. The system thrives on sameness. It works best when everyone follows the script without questioning it. But you broke the script the moment you refused to conform. You couldn't be labeled, boxed in, or controlled, and that terrified them. They excluded you, not because you didn't belong, but because your presence exposed how fragile their structures really were. Originals don't just stand out, they dismantle illusions. Your ideas, your presence, your refusal to settle for mediocrity, these weren't flaws. They were signals that the system wasn't big enough to contain you. They couldn't fit you into their small, safe categories, so they labeled you a problem instead. What they didn't realize is that the chosen ones always rewrite the rules. Systems are built to suppress change, but originals like you are the change. You weren't too much. The system was too small, and when the time comes, it won't just be the system falling apart. It'll be you rising above it, proving that the false stability they clung to was never real to begin with. Number 5. Your pain was the key to your genius. Pain has a way of teaching lessons that comfort never could. For chosen ones, it's not just an unfortunate part of life. It's the very thing that shapes their greatness. Every heartbreak, every rejection, every betrayal wasn't designed to break you. It was designed to open doors within you that most people never even know exist. Pain didn't punish you, it taught you. It activated your genius. When life stripped away your illusions, it forced you to dig deeper to find strength and creativity in places you didn't know you had. Ordinary people shy away from pain because it's uncomfortable, but you faced it, endured it, and eventually transformed it. That's the difference. You didn't just survive, you turned your pain into something extraordinary. Pain sharpens your perception. It strips away the noise and distractions, leaving only the raw, unfiltered truth. It forces you to confront who you are and what you're capable of. While others stayed on the surface, you went into the depths. You saw things differently because your experiences gave you a perspective that can't be taught in any school or learned from any book. The world often mistakes chosen ones as resilient or strong, but it's deeper than that. You didn't just bounce back, you transformed. Every wound became wisdom, every scar a map to your brilliance. Pain didn't make you bitter, it refined you. It gave you empathy, creativity, and a depth that ordinary lives can't reach. People who underestimated you didn't realize that your struggles were your training ground. They couldn't see that every tear you cried was watering a seed inside you, one that would grow into something powerful and unshakable. Your pain wasn't a curse, it was the key to unlocking the genius you were always meant to be. Number 6. The truth in you was a threat to their lies. The truth is dangerous. It doesn't ask permission, it doesn't make people comfortable, and it doesn't bend to fit anyone's agenda. You carried a truth so raw, so unshakable, that it became a threat to everything around you built on lies. They didn't reject you because you were wrong, they rejected you because you made it impossible for them to keep pretending. People cling to illusions because they're easier to handle than reality. They build their lives on false narratives, fragile egos, and convenient lies that keep everything in balance. But you walked into the room and shattered that balance simply by being yourself. Your authenticity was a spotlight, and it exposed everything they didn't want to face. Instead of confronting their own shortcomings, they made you the enemy. They tried to silence you, ridicule you, convince you that you were out of place or out of touch. But that wasn't about you. It was about them. They couldn't handle the way your truth forced them to question their own. The world doesn't persecute liars. It rewards them, makes room for them, even celebrates them because lies keep the system intact. But truth? Truth is disruptive. It dismantles false foundations and demands real change. That's why they feared you. Your authenticity was a force they couldn't control, and it threatened to tear down the comfortable illusions they built their lives around. You didn't fit in because you were never meant to. The world wasn't ready for what you had to offer, and deep down, they knew it. They feared the destruction your truth would bring. But they failed to see that destruction was necessary. You weren't here to maintain their illusions. You were here to tear them down and make room for something real. Number 7. The ridicule was camouflage. Ridicule is a weapon of the insecure. When they mocked you, laughed at you, or dismissed you, it wasn't because you were insignificant. It was because you represented something they couldn't understand, something they couldn't control. Deep down, they knew you saw the world differently, and that terrified them. Mockery was their shield, a desperate attempt to protect themselves from the discomfort of your truth. People laugh at what they don't understand. It's easier than admitting they're afraid. When they ridiculed you, it wasn't because you lacked worth. It was because your presence forced them to confront their own limitations. You saw through their facades, the lies they told themselves to feel safe, and they couldn't handle it. Your clarity, your vision, your refusal to play along with their charades, it all made them feel exposed. Ridicule was never about you. It was their defense mechanism, their way of deflecting attention away from their own shortcomings. They needed you to seem small so they could feel big. They needed to laugh at you so they wouldn't have to look too closely at themselves. Their mockery wasn't a reflection of your failure. It was a reflection of their fear. But here's the thing about ridicule. It's camouflage. It's noise meant to distract you from the truth that you're a disruptor, a force they can't ignore. Their laughter was a sign that you were shaking the foundations of their comfort zones. They wanted to make you doubt yourself, to shrink you into something they could understand. But you didn't shrink. Every joke at your expense was proof that you were onto something bigger than they could comprehend. They laughed to cover their fear, but the fear was real. In the end, it wasn't you who needed to change, it was them. Number 8. You were misunderstood because they saw fragments, not the whole. People love to judge based on what they can immediately see. It's easier for them to box you into a single idea, a stereotype, a moment in time, than to try to understand the complexity of who you are. They saw fragments of you, a mistake here, a triumph there, a moment of silence or strength, and thought they had the whole picture. But the truth? You were never meant to be understood in pieces. Your life is a symphony, and they were only hearing isolated notes. You were misunderstood because they didn't wait for the full story to unfold. They saw you in a moment of struggle and decided that's who you were. They caught a glimpse of your strength and assumed you didn't need help. They noticed your silence and mistook it for weakness. But all of these pieces were just snapshots, fragments of a much larger masterpiece that couldn't be defined by any single moment. What they didn't realize is that chosen ones are never static. You're always evolving, always growing into something greater than what you were yesterday. They clung to their limited view of you because it was easier than acknowledging that they didn't really understand you at all. They didn't see the layers, the depth, the connections between the pieces. Masterpieces take time to create, and brilliance can't be rushed. They were wrong about you because they judged too quickly based on incomplete information. They couldn't see the symphony you were composing, how every failure, every victory, every quiet moment was part of a bigger plan. You were misunderstood not because you were too small, but because they couldn't grasp the magnitude of who you are. They saw pieces, but you were always so much more than the sum of them. Number 9. The chosen ones are always out of sync with their time. Being ahead of your time is like being a signal in a world that's tuned to a different frequency. You felt it, didn't you? That sense that you didn't quite belong, that your ideas and energy were too far out there for people to understand. You were always just a few steps ahead, your thoughts too expansive, your vision too clear for a world still stuck in the present. That's why they labeled you weird or delusional. They couldn't see that you weren't out of touch with reality. You were just speaking a language they hadn't learned yet. The chosen ones don't fit neatly into their time. They don't adhere to the rules of the moment because they're busy crafting the future. You didn't see things the way others did, and that terrified them. When you spoke of ideas that seemed impossible or dreamt of a world that wasn't here yet, they dismissed you. How could they not? They were living in the constraints of their own limited perspective, blind to the possibilities you were already envisioning. You weren't wrong, you were just too advanced. You understood that the world couldn't evolve if everyone stayed stuck in the now. But evolution is uncomfortable. People fear what they don't understand, and so they pushed you aside, not realizing that your weirdness was the very thing that would one day change everything. You weren't delusional, you were visionary. The future spoke to you in ways others couldn't hear, and your energy was too raw, too unfiltered to fit into the safe, predictable norms of today. But while they laughed, dismissed, or misunderstood you, the world slowly began to catch up. And one day, when everything you saw finally materializes, it will be clear that the only thing wrong was their inability to recognize the greatness right in front of them. Number 10. You thrived in silence while they needed applause. While the world craved applause, you thrived in silence. You didn't need the constant validation, the likes, or the applause to know your worth. In fact, you flourished when no one was watching. When the world's expectations and noise faded into the background, they thought you were invisible. But the truth was, you were growing in ways they couldn't even begin to understand. You were building something they couldn't see, strength that wasn't rooted in approval, but in your own unwavering belief in yourself. They needed to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be told they were doing something right. Without the external validation, they felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Every like, every comment, every ounce of attention was like air to them. They needed it to survive. But you learned to breathe without it. You knew that the only opinion that truly mattered was your own. While they were busy chasing the approval of others, you were cultivating something deeper. Your strength came not from what others could see, but from the work you put in. When the lights were off, while they fed off the fleeting excitement of external praise, you were building a foundation that would last long after the applause faded. They looked at you and saw someone who wasn't trying to make a scene, and they misread it as weakness. But in reality, your quiet persistence was your superpower. You didn't need the world to validate your worth because you knew it was something you carried within. While they scrambled for external recognition, you were creating the kind of legacy that didn't need applause to endure. Your strength was rooted in what you built in silence, and that's what made you unstoppable. Number 11. You saw what they couldn't see. You always saw beyond the surface. While others were content with the illusions, the masks, the comfortable lies, you were staring into the heart of the truth. You saw through the cracks in their carefully constructed facades, the systems they mindlessly adhered to, the personas they projected to hide their insecurities. You couldn't help it. It wasn't just a talent. It was a burden because visionaries are always a little lonely. People who can see what others can't often find themselves standing in a crowd that can't understand their clarity, their insight, their drive. They called you crazy, delusional, impossible, because it's easier to dismiss what's uncomfortable than to face the truth. When you spoke out, when you pointed out things others couldn't see, they laughed. It wasn't because you were wrong. It was because admitting that you were right meant they would have to face the very systems, beliefs and habits they'd spent their lives building around them. The world doesn't like to be shown the truth. It refuses to acknowledge. It's safer to ridicule someone who challenges the status quo than to confront the uncomfortable reality of their words. So they called you crazy, dismissed you as irrational, and laughed it off. But you weren't crazy. You were simply ahead of your time, a step ahead of the crowd, seeing things they couldn't yet comprehend. You weren't just seeing the cracks, you were seeing what was to come after them. Being a visionary means understanding things others can't, but it also means navigating a world that isn't ready to hear it. They thought your clarity was madness because they couldn't see what you saw. But history has a way of catching up, and one day they'll look back and realize that the one who was crazy was simply the one who was right all along. Number 12. Their rejection was your redirection. Every no you heard wasn't a dead end. It was a cosmic redirect. Every door that slammed in your face wasn't a sign of failure, but a signal that you weren't meant to go that way. The world, in all its narrow-mindedness, thought it was pushing you out, but in reality, it was guiding you towards something far greater. They thought their rejection was the end of your journey, but it was merely a detour, a reminder that there are paths too small, too shallow to contain your true potential. You didn't see it at the time, of course. Each rejection stung, Each no made you question your worth. But in hindsight, it's clear that those rejections were actually blessings in disguise. They were saving you from being in spaces where you would have had to shrink, where your brilliance couldn't shine. You weren't being turned away because you weren't good enough. You were being redirected to places that could handle your greatness, where your vision wouldn't be dimmed, where your value was recognized. They didn't realize it, but every time they turned you away, they were clearing the path for something better. They weren't rejecting you. They were inadvertently making space for your true calling. They kept you from wasting your energy on places and people who couldn't appreciate what you had to offer. So when the doors closed and the world said, "Not here," it wasn't a rejection of you. It was the universe's way of saying, "Not yet, not here, but something bigger is waiting." And when the right doors open, you'll walk through them with the full understanding that every moment of rejection was nothing more than a step toward the greatness that was always meant for you. In the end, the chosen ones are the quiet disruptors, the ones who don't fit in, not because they don't belong, but because they're destined to change the game. The world may never understand you, may never see the full scope of your brilliance, but that's because they're not meant to. You were never created to blend into the background, to follow a script that others wrote for you. You were born to write your own, to blaze a trail that others will eventually follow. The rejection, the loneliness, the misunderstandings, they were never meant to break you. They were the tools that forged you, the pressure that shaped your brilliance. The very things that seemed like setbacks were actually the universe's way of aligning you with your purpose. You didn't need to be accepted because what you carried inside of you was always meant for more than the limitations of what they saw. Your time is coming. The world, as it always does, will catch up. They'll look back and realize that your authenticity, your vision, your refusal to conform weren't flaws. They were the seeds of a future they didn't yet know they needed. And when that moment arrives, it won't be you who has to prove your worth. It will be them, scrambling to understand how they missed it in the first place. So keep going, keep shining, keep being the force they never saw coming, because the truth is, the world needs your truth more than it will ever admit. You were never too much. You were always the answer to everything they didn't even know they were searching for. If what you've heard resonates with you, if you feel that fire inside, then don't let this moment slip by. Subscribe to the channel now, because the journey of the chosen ones is just getting started, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. We're here to share the truth, break the chains, and elevate those who were always meant for more. So hit that subscribe button, join the movement, and be part of something bigger, because your greatness deserves to be seen, and we're just getting started.